at the top of B tier, we have Frankie. Now, Frankie off the bat has years of fighting experience. He's got years of combat experience with his cyborg enhancements, whether it be pre-time skip or post-time skip. He's got the experience to handle a fight very well. As far as his arsenal, he's stocked with weapons. He's got beams, rockets, he's got cannons, he's got General Frankie. He has a lot of ways to combat a person, and a lot of those ways are pretty deadly. With his Battle Frankie 37 form, essentially, he's incorporated Vegapunk's blueprints, models, and technology into himself, which makes him more or less a pacifista, or at least someone that can go toe-to-toe with a pacifista. And I think that's very important to note, as pre-time skip, the crew had to work all together to take down one. I know post-time skip, it's somewhat of a less reaching feat, but I think it still in itself says that he's got a lot of strength and durability. And while a lot of Frankie's situations usually result in some kind of comedic effect, a lot of the times he is pretty good at assessing a fight and making the right decisions in a fight. I think we need to see more from him fighting strong people. I think the senior pink fight's more of, it's a serious fight and a gag fight at the same time, but it doesn't really provide Frankie any massive feats. And I don't think we have anything that gives Frankie that, like, oh, he beat this person, so he must be this strong kind of feat. The most I can say for Frankie, though, is that he was able to tangle with Luffy pre-time skip. Post-time skip, he's got Radical Beam. Radical Beam is crazy. And he's got General Frankie. General Frankie is made out of, I'm pretty sure, Wapo metal, and it can tank hits from Big Mom, or at least take one hit from Big Mom, which is impressive in itself. So if it's possible they can tank more, then that really amps up the durability feat. Frankie's sensitive back weakness isn't really a thing anymore, or at least I haven't really seen a whole lot happening with that. I don't think it's too big of a deal at this point, especially with essentially he's calling himself Armored Me, so he's decked out with stuff enough to kind of keep that from being a big hindrance. I would like to put Frankie a little bit higher on the list, but we just don't have the feats for it. Once we see him do something extraordinary or take down someone extraordinary, I think we can kind of scale him a little bit higher, but for now this is kind of where he sits. And now onto A tier. And this is going to be probably the most controversial of the tiers, just because of who we have in here and where they're ranked. First up is Jinbei. Now, personally, I don't like Jinbei being a part of the crew. I think it kind of ruins the dynamic as far as characters and strength, but that's just my personal opinion. When comparing him to the other crew members in this tier, it gets kind of hard just because Jinbei doesn't have the most post-time skip feats. Pre-time skip, we saw that he can do a lot of crazy stuff, especially in the water. Being able to fight Ace to a standstill, he was a warlord. Seeing him clash with the likes of Moria, Mihawk, and just tangle people during a war. So we see he has the ability to tangle with some really strong people. I think that being able to manipulate water with Fisherman Karate is a huge plus, because that's essentially unavoidable. And that kind of brings us to a feat in the post-time skip, when he's able to push Big Mom off the ship. And I think that's his biggest post-time skip feat. Now, he hasn't done a whole lot post-time skip, but that's the biggest and probably the only one he has that really stands out. And while I think there are some caveats to that, just because, weakened Big Mom, covered in water, he's coming out of the water. There's a lot of things that kind of play into that. I think that's still a feat in itself. However, I really don't think we have anything that is strong enough to say that he is over Sanji or Zoro. I think he needs to do more in the post-time skip in the New World to show how strong he is. Because if he's more or less the same as he was pre-time skip, I think that kind of puts him at a weaker status. And I don't know if he's been training or if he's been in active combat. I know he was working with Big Mom, so I'm not entirely sure how much he was doing with Big Mom. But if he's more or less the same as he was, then I definitely put him below Sanji and Zoro. And next in A tier is Sanji. And let me just go ahead and clarify this. I know that Zoro and Sanji are very close. Very close combat-wise, very close fighters, very close strength. But I give the edge to Zoro. And we'll get to Zoro in a minute, but let's talk about Sanji. I think Sanji's greatest strength comes from his speed and movement ability. You know, he's got Blue Walk, he's got Sky Walk, and he's got generally blistering fast speed. He was able to blitz Oven and essentially no one saw what was happening. And I don't think anyone else on the crew boasts movement speed like that. You have the argument that Brook has the attack speed when he has the speed blitzes, but overall, Sanji has the greatest movement speeds. Post time skip, his strength while in Diablo Jambe has increased by a lot. You know, he's able to do things like kick through a pacifista. The amount of damage that his fire does after he kicks, whether it be like a ranged attack or a close combat attack, that has increased greatly. And he can also do Diablo Jambe on both legs, so he's got essentially multiple avenues of dealing damage and the strength to back it up. We can also now take in his raid suit, which, as far as we know, gives him incredibly enhanced durability. It looks like it also increases his movement speed, but he was already blindingly fast, so I'm not entirely sure how much that affects him. The one thing I'm not positive on is how it enhances strength. I think it does enhance strength to some degree, but I don't know what the scales would be as far as how much of it is raid suit and how much of it is his own. It seems more like it enhances his abilities rather than it does give some new abilities, aside from stealth mode. And one of the reasons why Sanji lands third is that in just about each arc we see him fighting the third strongest, or who's known to be the third strongest person of that arc. And it's kind of a setup in which Luffy has the strongest, Zoro fights the second strongest, Sanji fights the third. And that's how it is for a lot of arcs. And I think that goes to show that the power level kind of falls in that same order. Now, sometimes this gets a little weird because I think the fights are more set up for each character than it is just a power leveling thing. For example, I don't know how well Sanji does against Hachi, and I don't know how well Zoro does against Kurobe. Those are two fights in which the people they were fighting against were set exactly to fight them. Hachi fighting Zoro makes sense because they're both swordsmen, but Hachi fighting Sanji seems like it would lean in Hachi's favor, because it'd be really hard for Sanji to get close. That in turn goes for Zoro and Kurobe, in which Kurobe is a close combat fighter, and he might be able to do some damage to Zoro before Zoro can really cut through him. However, more often than not, we see Sanji in a role in which he's fighting either the third strongest, or he's fighting more in a support role for the rest of the crew. And when I say support, I don't necessarily mean how Nami is. I mean, he's doing a majority of the fighting, but he's doing it to help others. And you see in Dressrosa, for example, when he's clashing against Virgo or Doflamingo, it's not necessarily a fight, it's more of he's fighting to help the others around him. And so he's kind of got this mix of, I have to fight just enough to keep you away from everyone else. And I think that's why his feats don't seem as good, because Sanji's fights are never just fights. There's always something else to that fight. That being said, I think he does end up in situations that might be a bit more than he can handle. I don't think he would have beaten Virgo had he stayed there, and I know he wouldn't have beaten Doflamingo. So those situations in which he was able to buy time essentially work out best for Sanji. When we look at feats with the raid suit, I think the biggest thing we see is that his durability is enhanced greatly. He's taking hits from top tier Zoans and he's getting back up with barely any pain. And he's able to dish out some decent damage, enough to make page 1 bleed, not necessarily KOing anyone quite yet, but he's doing enough damage to make some kind of difference. And now I think there are two things primarily that hold Sanji back from being as strong as he could be. The first being his motto of not hitting a female. And I think that in itself, and encompassing the kind of gag around Sanji and females, is that it works in a narrative of telling a story, but not the combat portions. Because when the combat portions comes up, it doesn't make sense in a way. And I'll use the Caulifla example. When he's fighting against her, or when he's matched up against her, this is a person who could possibly be holding Robin's future, Robin's life or death. And his choice in not attacking her essentially sentences Robin to her death. If no one else goes to fight her, of course. Of course, we'll have someone else. I mean, if push comes to shove, Luffy is definitely going over there and taking her out. I think, honestly, Zoro would, if he had to go take her out. Frankie, obviously Robin can't do it. Robin can't do it in that scenario, but you see what I'm saying, as in it makes him very limited as to what he can do as a fighter. Now, there aren't a lot of female pirates that are causing issues. I think we have, like, for the most part, Big Mom, Smoothie, and then you have Ulti and Black Maria. And those are like the big ones we see right now as far as female fighters that might give us a problem. Now I see the possibility of Sanji running into Black Maria, which could be a problem. And that unfortunately would end in Sanji's loss. That's how that goes. If it's against a woman, Sanji loses. The other thing that I think holds Sanji back is, in a sense, his body's durability. I think that Zoro and Sanji shared the same will and determination to accomplish goals, to defeat foes, to protect their friends, and the like and such. But I don't think Sanji's body is durable enough to kind of cash out in all his checks like Zoro's is. And the biggest example I'll point out is Thriller Bark. You know, when we have essentially all of the crews fighting oars, they're all taking damage, everyone gets knocked out. The first one back up is Zoro, and he's able to get back up and do attacks and kind of conversate, and he's still moving around. When Sanji gets back up, he's hobbling up towards Kuma and Zoro, and then he easily gets knocked out by Zoro. And I think that shows that he has that same determination. If he had the ability to, he would do the same thing that Zoro did. But I don't think he has that ability. I don't think he's, at base, durable enough to do those kinds of things, which is why I put him below Zoro. And at the top of the list, we have Zoro. Overall, it feels somewhat obvious that he kind of ranks second in the crew. You have him fighting the second strongest person. You have him being essentially the voice of reason to the rest of the crew, and even at times Luffy. He mirrors Rayleigh in a lot of different ways. That's like, this guy is obviously the second in command. This guy is obviously the second strongest. We have people comment all the time when they see his strength. How is he not a captain? You know, how is he taking orders when he's this strong? Post time skip, we see him cutting through giant ships, cutting through pacifistas. He's definitely leveled up as far as what he can do and what he can cut. I think the biggest cutting feat we've seen so far is him cutting through Pika, which is a controversial feat just because Pika wasn't that great of an enemy. It was more just a matter of hide and seek than it was a fight. But I think the cutting feat itself is what you kind of have to take away from that. Not only is Zoro insanely strong, but he's insanely durable. I'm pretty sure in every arc we see Zoro take some essentially life-ending damage, and we see in the next arc how that affects him. And I think he's one of the only characters where we see that kind of carries these big damages with him. You know, he's got Mihawk's scar. When he had the interaction with Kuma, he carried that damage with him to the Archipelago. So we see that he takes an insane amount of damage, and he's still able to keep going. Obviously, it has some kind of effect on him, but that rarely stops him from doing what he needs to do. I would wager that he's got very close durability feats to Luffy. I think Luffy edges him out with the fact that he's a rubber man. I think that's the biggest reason why Luffy edges Zoro out as far as durability goes. Because otherwise, the feats that we have Zoro doing with what you would call a standard human body, a normal human body, are insane. And we see him constantly training his body. We see him constantly putting himself in situations that not only causes his swordsman skills to grow stronger, but his body, his mind. He's constantly training everything so that it grows stronger, which is a reason I think he stands out above the rest, is that that's kind of Zoro's thing. Zoro wants to be the strongest swordsman. He wants to be the strongest. So he's got to train for that. I honestly can't say any other character on the crew really has an idea of being the strongest. Even Luffy, to an extent, doesn't necessarily have the dream of being the strongest person. He just wants to be free. He wants to be Pirate King. He wants to reach the One Piece. He wants to be free. Now that encompasses being the strongest, or at least being as strong as the strongest, because you can't get there otherwise. But that's not necessarily the goal Luffy is looking for. Whereas with Zoro, he wants to be the strongest. And Zoro has a ton of feats to his name. You know, I could list all of them, but we'd be here a while. But he's got speedless feats. He's got no sword style, 1 sword, 2 sword, 3 sword, 9 sword. He's got all kinds of things in his arsenal that make him very versatile as a fighter. And I think that being able to do ranged attacks is a big plus to his fighting ability, because I think close combat with a fast character is a bad matchup for Zoro. But being able to keep them away with long slashes, with Dragon Twister, being able to send things very damaging cutting attacks without being directly at someone, without having to cut through them, is a big plus to Zoro. I think the biggest limit to Zoro is the fact that he's not Luffy. So the fact that he can't be stronger than the captain. Like, he just, that role of strongest in the crew always goes to Luffy no matter what. So if there's a point in which they get close, or it seems like their strength is closing in, there's probably going to be something that either Luffy does or Zoro doesn't do that keeps that ranking separate. And finally, in S tier, we have Monkey D. Luffy. Now, Luffy being the main character and the one with the most focus, we know what kind of strength he has. We know what kind of durability he has. We know what kind of skills he has. And we can see that he's obviously a monster of a fighter. I mean, he's been training since he was young. He's trained under Garp. He's trained with Ace and Sabo and Rayleigh. He's trained with these incredibly strong fighters, each in different aspects of whether it be close combat, whether it be using his Delphi ability, whether it be using Haki. You have all of these aspects that make up Luffy as a fighter and that make him a really strong fighter. Another thing that Luffy holds over a lot of other fighters is that he can learn mid-fight. He has the ability to adapt different styles mid-combat, and I think that's really dangerous because we see, for example, like the Luffy and Blue Note fight, we see him show the applications of Shave, in which Blue Note's like, okay, so he's seen what we can do. He's learned it for himself, and he's mastered it, and now he's using it in his own way, in his own fighting style that surpasses what we can do with our own. And then we see it again with Katakuri, where he's fighting with Katakuri and he's honestly getting beaten up terribly, but he's still getting up, and as he's getting beaten up, he's learning, he's honing his observation haki and bringing it to a point where it sits somewhere near Katakuri's. Now, I still think that Luffy is under Katakuri, and I still think that his observation haki is under Katakuri's. I don't think he's reached Katakuri's level quite yet, but he obviously had growth during that fight. And Luffy's biggest strength feat obviously is Gear 4. Gear 4 puts Luffy on an entirely different level than not just the Straw Hat crew, but fighters in general. Gear 4 is able to do a massive amount of damage and is fast enough to blitz and do that damage. A lot of people say that Gear 4 puts Luffy somewhere near an admiral, and I don't disagree with that. I think it takes a lot more to fight admiral, as far as, you need to have the experience, you need to have the knowledge, and I think that just having the raw strength won't necessarily make him capable, but I think this is a strong standing for being able to fight someone of that level. And you have the variations of Gear 4 that make it even stronger. You have Bound Man, which immense strength, speed, and then you have that kind of natural armor of Haki mixed with Devil Fruit that makes him a very tough opponent. And then you have Snake Man, which is less strength but blinding speed, to the point where people that can see in the future are having trouble dealing with this. And I think that in itself is a note to how strong these forms are. It's just that they have a time limit. I think it's increased since he first created it, to where he has more time in the form and that he can use the form more efficiently, but it's been commented on many times again that Gear 4 is not efficient. Gear 4 boasts power, speed, and enhancements, but is not efficient. In that if Luffy can't do what he needs to do while in Gear 4, he's gonna have a problem. Because once he's out of Gear 4, if the person he's fighting isn't done, they're gonna take him out. And like I was saying before, a lot of his durability comes from his rubber body, and that makes up a lot of the fights he's in with, where he's going blow for blow with some of these people. Being able to kind of not necessarily brush off, but absorb, deflect, do away with some of the damage that brute force kind of does to you is huge. A lot of your punches, a lot of kicks, a lot of things essentially you do to Luffy, they bounce off, they bounce back. You need some advanced haki, you need strength, you need a lot of things to do sufficient damage to Luffy, unless of course you have sharp weapons, which are kind of his weakness. Even now in post time skip, he's not at that level where sharp weapons are useless against him. Those are still pretty useful, and if we see more of those, they could pose a problem that he has to overcome. But most people in One Piece are physical combatants. You have very few strong weapon users, or at least sharp weapon users. And I think that's what sets him above the crew itself and a lot of other characters in the series. Is just his overall kit is insanely powerful for someone of his age, of his standing. Being able to dish out that much damage is just, it's not really matched by any of the other characters, of any of his other peers. So like Law and Kid, from what we've seen, they can't do the things that Luffy can do. And that's really what sets him out as a very strong character. Alright guys, that's my list. Please leave a comment, tell me if you agree, if you disagree, like, follow, however it works, just do it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.